Hi everyone, this is Jo, the Community Engagement Officer for Naturehood in Wiltshire, and today I would like to talk to you about maintaining a wildlife-friendly pond in a natural way without any equipment such as pumps or filters or anything like that, because a truly natural pond should just be natural and you shouldn't need any equipment. It should just sort itself naturally. This video won't be about building a wildlife pond, or it won't be about creatures that live in a pond, because we covered that before. A few weeks ago our lovely Kaz did a video on ponds, basically on how to create one, so you can catch up on it if you're interested on our Naturehood YouTube channel, and then just look for Kaz's video and you'll be able to see that. Today will be about how to keep your pond clean without any filter equipment. And I really love ponds, I'm really passionate about them, and when I talk to people about creating ponds, they're a bit worried about, oh, will I not need a filter, will it not go stagnant, will it not go horrible and just completely wrong? And I was like, if you create the right environment and you do it right, and with minimal help, a pond should be able to sort itself out as a proper real ecosystem. This pond is about 1 year and a half, and you can see it's literally crystal clear, isn't it? Pretty good. So this just proves that you can have a natural wildlife-friendly pond without a filter. And of course there are ponds that need a filter, and these will be the purely ornamental fish ponds with ornamental fish such as koi or goldfish. And then it's a completely different concept because they are an ornamental feature of your garden. So the way it works, you create a water body, a pond like that, or maybe a bit bigger, a bit smaller, and then straight away, before anything else has a chance to introduce itself to the pond, you introduce fish, mature adult fish, which will eat everything pretty much that will try to establish itself in the pond. And also they will produce quite a lot of waste, and that's why you will need a filter for ornamental fish pond. And I can hear you saying, well, what about in nature? In nature, lakes and ponds have fish in them and everything, you know, coexists and all the animals live there without any problems. But in a natural way, let's say you've got a water body naturally created, or you create a natural wildlife pond, all the animals have a chance to establish themselves gradually and then live in balance. So for example, fish be introduced as well, but they will be introduced as eggs first, birds will bring them on their feet or on their feathers, and all the creatures that move into the pond will basically grow up together gradually, and there is a balance. Everything has a chance to establish itself, and then you create a really good ecosystem. And I promise you, if you create a pond, wildlife-friendly pond in your garden, it will be one of the most rewarding things you've ever done in a garden. I work for an environmental organisation, and when we created that about 1.5 years ago, we knew this is going to be great for wildlife, but it exceeded our expectations. I sit here for hours and think about, I wouldn't expect to basically support that much wildlife. And it's not just the creatures that live in a pond, but it's also the land creatures, the insects that sit in the shallow bit on the pebbles and drink. It's the badgers that come to our garden and have a drink on a hot day, on a hot night. It's the birds that come to bathe. It's basically a fantastic thing. And then just to summarise, I would like to say that if you want a purely pond that will support wildlife in your garden rather than an ornamental pond, then I suggest not to introduce fish to it. And if the fish gets introduced naturally, then that's fine, but that's a completely different story. So how do you get a pond that looks pretty, supports wildlife, and is clean, it doesn't smell? Well, basically we created that a while ago. It's a mature pond now, and we came across all the problems that people come across, and there aren't many, and the problems you come across are only at the beginning, when the pond hasn't established itself very well yet. And I classify these problems into 3 sections really, and as I said, they might be the worst case scenarios basically. So the first one would be algae blooms, and you would get 2 types of algae blooms. It would be blanket weed or suspended algae, and your water just goes green and the algae smothers the entire pond. And it very, very, very often happens, but it's a really, really easy thing to deal with. Second one is build-up of sludge. So basically the water gets a bit murky and smelly, and you get a build-up of organic matter that keeps breaking down, and the bad bacteria start growing, and that's when you get sort of stagnant, smelly water. And the third one that people come across often when having a wildlife pond is some species of plants that potentially arrived naturally or got introduced with the plants that you purchased from a garden centre, or maybe you introduced some plants that you didn't know might be a little bit more difficult to manage and they take over a little bit. And I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. But first of all, the blanket weed and the suspended algae, so general algae blooms. They happen often, and they happen in natural bodies of water as well, but they happen particularly in sort of man-made ponds and gardens, because people often fill the ponds with tap water, and tap water basically contains a lot of nutrients, and sometimes even it's just not even practical to fill the pond with rainwater. Ideally you would fill it with the rainwater, but even smaller ponds filled with rainwater, unfortunately sometimes you just get a lot of nutrients from the fertilizers in your garden. Even if you're using natural fertilizers, there are still nutrients, or from a sort of, you know, neighborhooding farm or anything like that, and the weather's sunny and algae just takes over. And especially when the pond is new, there aren't other plants that help to suppress it. So what I suggest, if you happen to build a pond and it went green straight away, and you didn't even have a chance to use any preventative measures like us, our water went green within 24 hours, you can use products, very affordable, completely, you know, inexpensive, and they are natural products. Most of them are wildlife friendly. Just double check whether they are safe for fish and other wildlife. Most of them will have a little logo, and you can just get them online, and you basically look just for algae treatment, and that will sort itself out. And then I just recommend using preventative measures. One very common and traditional one is using barley straw. So you either buy a little bale of barley straw, probably about this size, and then you put it in a pond, prop it with a rock, and the way it works, the barley straw will very slowly start biodegrading, and when it starts breaking down, it produces very tiny amounts of hydrogen peroxide, very, very tiny, so it doesn't harm any other plants or aquatic wildlife. But what happens, it basically suppresses algae bloom. However, it takes a little time with the real natural barley straw, and sometimes before it starts working and kicking in, it takes a few weeks for the peroxide to start releasing into the water. You might be too late and you might start getting algae bloom. So I personally prefer, again, still very inexpensive barley straw extract, which is already slightly processed and it's already active ingredient, and you just add a little bit to your pond every couple of weeks or every month during the summer season. In winter, ponds are fairly self-sufficient. Basically, they just are quite dormant. And another thing, really interesting thing, to suppress algae naturally, and it's a preventative measure, is introduce lots of plants that consume nutrients, that absorb a lot of nutrients. And for example, one good example is watercress. We've got a little bit here, and especially in the lockdown, it was a bit difficult to get plants in the last few weeks. But basically, I got this from a supermarket. It's a watercress. Just make sure it's not the salad cress, it's the larger leaves in the bag. And it's a native plant, and it spreads nicely, provides really nice cover and shelter. And newts absolutely love laying eggs on them. They basically lay an egg and fold it. And watercress is excellent at absorbing excess nutrients and suppresses algae growth. You can even see that where I had very small clumps of blanket weed, it basically just props itself there and roots, and it starves the blanket weed. But there's still a little bit of blanket weed left for the animals to hide in, and basically blanket weed, any weed, any algae is important, but in a very small amounts. So some of it is very beneficial because it provides shelter and it provides food for some of the aquatic life. However, you just don't want it smothering your plant. And the second issue is with sludge. So let's say you did have an algae problem, and then the algae, you treated it and it's now dead and biodegrading, so there's a lot of organic matter that is dying in the pond. Or let's say you had a lot of leaf falling from a tree, and you couldn't take it all out and it's breaking down, and basically sludge is produced from too much organic matter decaying in your pond. And a little bit of sludge is good. A lot of sludge will create really smelly water, and the way you can combat it is basically adds some beneficial bacteria, almost like a probiotic for humans. And again, it's a really natural and inexpensive way. It's a way of treatment for wildlife pond. Again, I don't want to really recommend particular products now because it's not fair, but they're all very similar, and you just literally look for a sludge treatment. And I add it to the pond, whether I've got sludge or not. I add it to the pond every couple of weeks in the summer because it just basically helps to control the bad bacteria. It's almost like a probiotic. It's almost like Yakult or Actimel that we drink to maintain good bacteria, and they help to break down all that horrible smelly stuff. And the third problems that you may come across is some of the plants. Yeah, some of the plants, Ian's giving me 5 minutes warning, so we don't run over. Some of the plants are native, good for the pond, but they spread like wildfire. And for example, this is duckweed, and it looks really pretty. Tiny little leaves, like little stars. And they're also very good because they provide food, they provide shelter. Lots of animals like to eat them. However, they could, if you didn't control it, cover the entire pond. So what you want to do is basically, very frequently, don't wait until it all builds up with any other plant that takes over. Just do it every couple of weeks, spend 10-15 minutes just skimming it out, double check whether there are no creatures stuck to it, because some of them will be sheltering underneath. And if you're still unsure whether you recovered everyone, then leave it by the side of the pond, especially late in the evening, especially if it's been a hot summer day, so they've got a chance to come back. But my advice is never leave clearing your pond, never just create a big job of it. Do a little bit gradually and more often, because you're less likely to trap any creatures in the weed or any excess plant matter that you take out. And another thing you can do to introduce to your pond, if we have time, we've got 3 minutes, basically Daphnia. They're completely natural pond dwellers. They live in lakes, rivers. I don't know if you can see them. They're tiny little organisms that feed on algae, on bad bacteria. They're just excellent little pond cleaners. And people would say, well, why are you talking about introducing something to the pond? Whatever, it should be a natural pond. But they will arrive anyway. So it's, in my opinion, it's good to introduce them early, so they don't interfere with everything. They just provide good source of food for amphibians, for larger insects, and they also clean your pond. And you can get them online again from sort of fish. You can buy them as live fish food, basically, and you're giving them a happy life in the pond. So I think that's about it. All these problems we're talking about are worst case scenario, and they only happen when you're just establishing your pond. A year after, the pond is pretty much self-sufficient. You only need to help it a little bit. You can see it looks really good. And the last thing I would like to say, if you have any questions, if I haven't covered anything, or if something wasn't clear, just make sure, don't hesitate to comment under this video, and I'll try to answer any questions. And last thing, if you haven't signed up to Naturehood.uk, please do so. You'll be helping help wildlife in our gardens, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.